All right, welcome back to another session. So this is the sixth session. Sorry, we had a bit of a background issue, but we're here, and we are going to start off with a panel discussion with this one. So let's get straight into it and not waste any more seconds. And enjoy. This one is on financial planning and clients of the future. Chanelle Pattinson is the facilitator, and another phenomenal panel that will share their insights and their experience with you. So here we go.
Hi everyone, we're on to another panel which I'm very, very excited for. So as Francois mentioned, it's financial planning at clients of the future. So as per the intro, I've got my amazing panelists, Georgina, Rizanne and Dan, and we're going to chat a bit about what the future changing needs of clients is, what they want, how they want it, where they want it, all these different things. So hi guys, how are you all?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having us here, Chanelle. And to Francois as well, what a great event this is.
Yeah, hi all. Brilliant.
Hello everyone. Nice to see you all. I feel pumped after that music as well, by the way. I'm ready to do this now. That is some good. He's chosen well, Francois. It's good, some good music.
It was a good intro. It was a good intro. Amazing. So first question, guys, is what do you think clients of the future look like in the world of financial planning? And are their needs different to when their parents were in their 20s and 30s? I don't know, Georgina, do you want to go first?
Well, very happy to kick us off. So it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because actually, when I engage with financial planners in South Africa, despite my accent, I have lived here for 7 years now. So I do know a little bit about the landscape here. And when I engage with financial planners in South Africa, what they often say to me is, do you know what, my age range of the book that I look after is pretty similar to what it has been for the last 10, 20 years. I tend to actually look after people who are between 45 and 70. So actually what's actually changing? It seems to be the same demographic that's coming through time after time. And I think here's the interesting thing is actually people are just moving forward, and at the time at which they want to seek advice, it seems to be the same generation after generation, usually after a life event, maybe inheriting, maybe a windfall or whatever it is, or divorce or something along those sort of lines where they feel they need to seek advice. And it seems to be around about that 40, 45 age range that they actually move into a planner's book. But that doesn't really answer the question, what are we doing to those people, for those people who are younger? And I'm sure you're going to come on to that later, Chanelle. But what I'm seeing really is the same kind of people coming through as the majority of a financial planner's book. So that age range, 45 to 70, seems to be pretty consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, have you got any thoughts?
Oh, do I? Yes. So I completely agree with what you're saying there, Georgina. I think it's pretty similar to what I'm thinking in my head, which is that the basic need of clients, which is, as we all know, it's, am I going to be okay? That's the question that everybody asks in life. That's the one thing that humans want to know is, am I going to be okay? And that basic need will never disappear no matter what age you are. So whether you're in your 20s, 30s, or like Georgina was saying, in your 45s and in your 70s. So I completely agree with what Georgina was saying there. When it comes to the question of what their needs are and are they different, I think they are. I think that has a mixture of things to do with what age they are, but also the world that we live in today. So I think perhaps the need of delivery is different. I think this idea of going to someone's office and that needing to be the way that you do it is probably not. I mean, certainly I'm in my 20s, and that is not the way that I want to have financial planning delivered to me now. I want it kind of a more hybrid approach. Doesn't need to be, in person as much. I also think that, and Chanelle, you can back me up on this, but we are a bit more of a distracted generation. I think everyone would agree with that as well. We do tend to get distracted a little bit more. So the delivery itself, I think, needs to be a bit different and a bit more kind of engaging, a bit more to the point, and certainly more efficient and quicker. You know, what you used to be able to do in 4 meetings 20 years ago, you can now do in 1 meeting, just because of the technology and the efficiency that we have out there. So the basic need, I think, is exactly the same. And Georgina is exactly right that, you know, it's usually some kind of transition that leads people to get in touch. But our generation is certainly wanting different things from financial planners. I think that's probably what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rizanne, have you got any thoughts?
Yes, and I completely concur with Dan there and Georgina. I think there's a very big barrier in terms of the delivery. Need might be the same, but the way it's delivered is completely inappropriate for that specific market. I think if you look at that market, just look at video, for instance. People want, the trend is people want video to be authentic, less fluff, more you. And I think the delivery of the financial planning that's being given is not fulfilling that need for authenticity and trust. And I also think that probably it's a matter of giving more digestible information in a more convenient manner and letting go of the jargon, because the jargon does not impress anymore. I don't think it's a generation that's impressed by jargon at all. And I think when you bring in a lot of complicated things and terms and documents and things to understand between the end consumer, what you're really doing is you're saying to them, well, here's a house, but you can't have the keys to it. You know, and I think it's a generation that really wants to take ownership, and they want to understand and really get involved in, you know, where their lives are going. And I think we've got to look at that barrier over there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that leads quite nicely on to the next question I was going to ask, which was, how do we connect with these future clients, or whatever you want to call them? Do we need to do things differently to how we're doing them now? I know, Dan, if you want to start us off, you have a few thoughts on this one.
Yes. So I think one of the things that I think people still need to realize is that nowadays we need to show the value of the relationship with a financial planner rather than the information that you get from a financial planner. Information nowadays is, we live in, like, you know, information overload times. So wherever you go, you're just bombarded with information all the time, and it's free. You know, you can find pretty much anything out nowadays. So I always say to people, don't try and compete with Google. Your clients aren't looking for you to compete with Google. They are looking for you to have that personal, this is any generation really, but they are looking for that personal relationship that they can't get from online or from anywhere else. I also think that probably the model, and this is something that you're doing, Chanelle, great work in, is that the model needs to change. So when I say model, that is pretty much everything. It's business model, it's fee model, it's, you know, the way that we deliver financial planning. I think that definitely needs to become more accessible for people. I'm probably not the person to come up with the bright ideas on that. I think, Chanelle, you're doing some great work on it, and there's some other people doing great work in that area as well. And something else, which I think touches on what Rizanne was saying before, connection for our generation, for me, is based on transparency and trust. I think our profession, or a lot of people still see it as an industry, still has a pretty bad reputation. I mean, I can speak for the UK. I don't know what it's like in South Africa, but it does have a pretty bad reputation here in the UK. It's getting a little bit better, but it's still pretty bad based on the stuff that's happened in the past. And to reverse that and to overcome that, trust and transparency need to be absolutely everything. So, you know, speak how your clients speak. That's one way to connect with them. And just, you know, have a no BS attitude. Just do not tell them lies. Don't tell them anything that you can't back up. Just be truthful and just be your authentic self, which is where things like video and stuff like that come in, which is exactly what Rizanne was saying as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Georgina, I can see you sort of like nodding along as Dan was speaking. So have you got anything to sort of add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I love the way Dan's not missed out the piece about relationship. There's a real, and there's some research by Stanlib, which I thought was really interesting. So what they say is 71% of advisors think this generation is more tech-based than the last generation. And 43% of advisors think that actually the next generation would prefer to be robo-advised. Now, that may just be a moment in time as to how old they are at the moment. But actually, when you talk to that next generation, you see 76% of them say they actually want to be engaged in a relationship, particularly when they inherit money or a life event happens that means that triggers that need perhaps to go and get advice. So I think that's a really interesting concept. And it's perhaps a warning to those watching about your own biases about the next generation. You know, do you have those inbuilt biases that think, gosh, how on earth am I going to become relevant for that next generation? How am I going to connect with them? Does it all have to be social media and tech and all of this? Actually, it comes down to human relationships again and again. And that's why I completely agree with a lot of what Dan said there.
Can I just come in for a sec there, Chanelle, just before you move on? You're completely right, Georgina. I think we're maybe the wrong people to be asking what the next generation of clients want. The best people to ask what the next generation of clients want are the next generation of clients. So, you know, we can, you know, come up with ideas and we can come up with, you know, all these different theories about what they want and all that kind of stuff. But the best people to ask and the ones who are going to tell you the truth are the people who you're looking to serve. So, you know, you've done surveys, Chanelle. A lot of people have done surveys, just like what Georgina was talking about there. And often it is far removed from what we actually thought they want. So I think a really useful tip is just doing some market research on what people actually want as well. And sorry, I stole from Rizanne there. So
no, that's absolutely fine, Dan. we get the pleasure to look at your lovely lightning there. Chanelle, sorry, we had a joke beforehand. Chanelle, I think in how we connect, Dan and Georgina has really covered it all, really, in terms of the relationships and all of that. And I think there we really need to look at what is the hesitancy in taking on that means of connection. Is it a lack of understanding on how to do it? Is it a lack of understanding on how to take on the approach? If we look at the speed of digital adoption and transformation, it's been exponential. And it's hard to keep up in the first place as a professional that also needs to do your job and then still learn and. And it's also hard, I think, we touched on it in the previous, a few of the previous panels actually, is in can regulation keep up fast enough in order to allow advisors to move at the same pace? I mean, if we look at how fast things have evolved from, say, the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution to now the fourth industrial, I mean, things just go faster and faster. And we need to anticipate that it's going to keep on going faster. So Dan, coming into your point where, you know, we need to ask the next generation, probably we should ask the next and the next generation, because things are going to move so fast that we need to anticipate that we have to already be able to move faster in order to serve people's needs.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, definitely. And going back to what we sort of said a few moments ago about how the age of clients isn't really changing, we're not seeing much of a change there. I guess why? Like, do we have any thoughts on why the age isn't changing? Is there anything we can do? Like, why is the bracket staying so much the same? Like, why are we not getting new clients who are younger than the typical financial planning client? Dan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it'll draw on a lot of what Georgina was saying, to be honest. I think on one side, there's the argument that these transitions don't usually happen until that age, which could be a reason. For me, that's a bit of a cop-out and a bit of an excuse. And I'm not saying that by you, Georgina. I'm saying that by the whole profession. It's a bit of a kind of saying, well, they don't, you know, these younger people don't need it anyways, or the next generation won't need it because they haven't got any transitions going on. There's still, you know, hundreds of transitions that you go to before you get those big transitions like retirement and stuff. And we all know the value of financial planning from the age of 25 versus the age of 55. You can make huge financial decisions at an earlier age. And with a financial planner there, they can help you make those decisions better. So on the other side, we could look at our profession and how we present ourselves to the world. I don't think that we make it accessible for young people or for the next generation at all. The pricing model, for instance, this whole AUM thing, I know it works for financial planners, but does it really work for the next generation of clients? Majority of them, I don't think it does. That needs to absolutely change. I think when we look at our profession, again, it's going to sound offensive, this, but it looks like it is from the 80s and the 90s in terms of the websites that we have, the outward-facing, client-facing documents that we have, some of the stuff that I see on a daily basis. Terms of business, client agreements, even financial planning documents, they still look like they were 40 years, like designed 40 years ago. And if I was a client of a financial planner, that wouldn't exactly scream to me that relationship that Georgina has been talking about as well. But then I think it does come back, and this is my final point before I let the other guys, because I've been talking for way too long, is we need to realize why they would seek advice. So we need to do some research into what that next generation and what the younger clients and what those transitions actually are. So we know that buying a house, for instance, that's a transition where a financial planner could come in and help you out with that, or at least give you some financial guidance. But why don't we list out the other hundreds of transitions that you go through before the age of 45, and then identify how we can help the clients in those transitions, rather than just waiting for them to come to us. Why don't we identify how we can help them first, and then decide if it's going to be profitable for us as well? So yeah, I mean, I've got loads more that I can say on that, but I'm going to let the other guys come in.
No, that was really interesting, Dan, and really, I like that way of looking at it. Rizanne, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I can't come at this from a financial planner perspective because I'm not a financial planner. But I think I can definitely say that I would ask would it not make sense if you caught people early? By the time they're 45, they're going to be much healthier financial individuals. So, I mean, you might be catching people at 45, but now, they're not as valuable as they would have been if they were pruned way earlier. So I think from maybe an idealistic or a business perspective, it would make sense for me that if I can get somebody that's more weightier at that age, that I would start a percentage of the time investing in, some education or looking at a segment of clients that would be right for me. That's just from a consumer perspective, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes it's kind of, not that you're an outsider, but like an outside point of view is really helpful, because I think sometimes within a profession, you look so internally to get ideas and thoughts, and actually that's not always the best way to do it. And sometimes looking outside of the profession is really, really helpful. Georgina, have you got any thoughts?
Yes, quite a few. It's whether I can string them together cohesively. So this is really interesting, I think, because when you look at various pieces of research, there's other research out there that Schroders have done, and they say that 65% of the next generation won't use the financial advisor that their parents used. And we can ask ourselves why that might be, and perhaps we need to ask ourselves some questions around whether we're engaging that next generation enough and early enough. And that's from research overseas. That's from research in the UK. Now, what South African advisors are really battling with, and it's a particular nuance to hear, is it's all very well when actually most of the time the next generation are staying in the same jurisdiction. They're staying in the UK. But actually what's happening in South Africa is what you've got is the next generation actually going overseas. Particularly of a demographic which tends to hold a lot of the wealth of the nation. So I think what financial planners are really battling with, and I know the FPI did some research into this in 2017, and over 70% of South African advisors said, I'm worried about this. I'm worried about where my next generation of clients are coming from because they're moving overseas. And they saw that there was a problem, and there was a problem around this back in 2017, but fewer than 15% were doing anything about it. And it does feel like quite a tricky problem to solve. And I think as an industry, I'm not sure we've really got our heads around it. But here we are, 2022, And I'm pretty sure those stats won't have changed. In fact, it probably will have got worse. So really, I think the question to the profession is what are we doing here in South Africa to help advisors really connect with that next generation? Because if in the UK, where the next generation tends to hang around in the same jurisdiction, 65% of them won't use the same planner as their parents, well, it's even more of an uphill struggle here. So I guess the question is, what can you do? And for me, it's really a 5-year plan, a 5-year strategy that says, okay, it hits lots of different threads. How am I engaging with them? How am I able to help these guys as they're overseas? Am I investing offshore in an appropriate way? Am I partnering with advisors in various jurisdictions that will be able to help each other as this next generation of South African citizens become more and more global citizens? So really, it's a big problem, and I don't really think we've come to grips with it at all in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. And I guess that kind of also ties into another way you can potentially reach clients is social media and online platforms, which is like a whole nother world and a whole nother thing. But can we use these platforms to connect with these potential clients? Like, what possibility does it potentially have? I guess, Dan, I know you do a lot of work with this, so if you want to get us started on your thoughts. And this is our last question, so make sure it's a good answer.
Oh God, what pressure. I'm going to be terse with this, because if I don't be terse, then we'll be here for hours. So I think one of the best things that I see people using social media is when they've got a very, very clearly defined target audience with who they work with. It's one of our biggest problems in our profession is that we're way too general, and we call it a niche, or we call it a specialism, when reality it's just working with a target audience. Like that's all having a niche or a specialism is. It's just having a target audience. But the amount of financial planning firms I see that don't have a target audience, they don't really know who they want to work with. They've got a general idea, maybe like business owners or people approaching retirement or something like that. But when it comes to the next generation of clients, we need to, I think what works really well with them is identifying the target audience really well. So I did a podcast recently with someone from America who he only works with millennials who work at tech companies and who have equity comps at those companies, for instance. Now that is, it sounds like it's a super like specialized niche. In reality, it's just a really good target audience, because he knows exactly what those clients are looking for, what they need, how we can help them, the type of language that they use, what type of language works with them. And as a result, he's not being too broad with the things he's trying to cover. He's just focusing on them. And whenever they have a problem or whenever they have anything like that, he'll be the first person that they'll go to. They've got no one else at the front of their mind when it comes to something like that. So again, I mean, I've got millions and millions and millions of things to say about social media. The first thing would be that, a lot of people say, oh, I don't get anything from it, therefore I don't use it. And if we think about what that sentence actually says, is that it's a bit of a nonsensical sentence. If you start using social media and if you start using it properly and really focusing on your target audience, then you'll get results from social media. So really define your target audience and get out of the mindset of you don't get anything from it, therefore you're not using it, and try and switch that mindset a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Amazing. Rizanne, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think perhaps, I mean, if we look at the age of consumers being served, it's probably a reflection of the age of the advisors serving them. So this really reflects on digital adoption and some education. Now, I can understand that it is probably very intimidating if you look at young millennials and younger even giving advice, your Instagram stars giving like really accessible advice, or, they've got the freedom to do that somehow. And it might seem like, oh, well, I'm already so far behind. And I think it's just, to just get started and just a lot of education. I mean, the digital adoption space really does need a lot of work. I think it needs a lot of internal work from advisors themselves to break through that barriers of this is too intimidating or I'm already behind. And I think as an industry as a whole, there does need to be a lot of investment in getting people moving into that space, because it is just going to get faster. The sooner you start, the less you are behind. So getting started as soon as possible is probably a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And Georgina, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so social media, I think, it can be a double-edged sword. There's definitely a space for it, but as we know, and I know planners out there will agree with me, this industry is based on trust. And how do you gain trust or earn trust even over the social media platforms, whatever they may be at whatever point in time? You actually need to build this relationship and work with multi-generationals to actually really make yourself relevant and really work in line with what each generation wants and likes. So from a social media perspective, I think a lot of business owners feel that it might be the silver bullet, and I don't think it is by any stretch. It's just another string to the bow. And I completely agree with what Dan said. You know, if you don't know who your target audience is, then you really will be wasting money and just pouring it down the drain. And on that, you know, if you've never turned away a client, you don't have a client value proposition. You know, that's actually how strict you have to be in terms of how you're actually developing your practice and how you want to work. So then coming back to the point about trust, you know, when you think about trust, and there's loads of different articles out there on trust and trust equations and all sorts of other things, and you think about how I could actually engender trust over social media or over any kind of engagement. And for me, it's based on three things, and they're in an ascending order, if you like. And number one, being the least important, is competence. You know, can you do the job? And number two is benevolence. Are you on my side? Are you going to look after me? And number three is integrity. Are you going to do what you said you're going to do when you said you're going to do it? And is it the right thing? And if you can get those 3 points very clear in your mind for your target audience, for your client value proposition, then I think it doesn't matter which way you engage with someone, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's social media, whether it's whatever it is, Zoom or whatever. If you've got those three things really clear in your mind, then trust starts to be earned, and then you start to engage in whatever way is appropriate for the next generation.
Amazing. What a brilliant way to end the conversation. Amazing. Thank you so much to the brilliant panelists, and thank you everyone for watching at home.
Thank you.
Good stuff. What a riveting conversation. Thank you very much, Chanelle. Job well done. And next up, we have our next keynote, which is Ollie Smith. He is the editor over at Morningstar UK, and really looking forward to his discussion on what workplaces can do in order to help specifically on mental health. So some of those well-being traps. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ollie.
Thanks so much, Francois, and thanks for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be invited to speak to so many people. What I'm going to do today, contrary to what you just said about how workplaces can tackle mental health, I'm going to talk about what they shouldn't do. That might sound a little bit negative, but there are huge positives that will come from it, I hope. Just to give you a little insight into structure, I've got 10 minutes, so I don't have long, but I'm going to take you through a little bit of an introduction as to how I came onto this topic and the limits of my expertise. And then I'm going to take you through what I think are 5 well-being traps that companies large and small tend to make at the moment when it comes to well-being. And then I'm just going to recap and wrap up at the end. So I'll get going as quickly as I can. So my name's Ollie Smith. I'm the UK editor here at Morningstar, which is for those of you who don't know, it's a large American asset management, financial services, analytics and publishing house. I run their UK editorial as part of the EMEA operations here from our offices in London, which are conveniently located in Oliver's Yard, which is very nice for me to go to every day. And I really came onto this topic, though, in a former life at Citywire. So I joined Morningstar in October last year, having spent 7 years at a fellow sort of financial publishing house, CityWire, where I was a reporter first and foremost before becoming a producer and then editor. And during that time, I spent a little bit of time looking at mental health in financial services, and I started to formulate a little bit of a view on what was going on. But I think there are some broader corporate lessons really that can be taken from my experience there. I will say that some of the things I'm about to say to you, I've kind of believed for some time, and some of them I've formulated in my head more recently, and I think it's important to say that this is an evolving picture. So onto the wellbeing traps. These are things that I think businesses get wrong about mental health. So number one is surveys instead of conversations. I think particularly in the data era that we live in, and particularly concerning larger companies like my own, there's a real tendency to go straight to the data fact find before actually having a conversation at ground level and face to face. And it's not to say that data isn't invaluable, because it absolutely is. But what I tend to see within the corporate space is a lot of effort and money being spent on finding out surveys to get what I would call a kind of diagnostic overview of well-being in the workplace. And what isn't happening are some of the fundamentals around managing people well and having conversations with them that are sincere, honest, and transparent about how they are. And that's part and parcel of a broader conversation that you have with anyone that you work with or works for you. So I think that's number one. A wellbeing trap number two is leaving it to the mental health first aiders. And I would say of the 5 traps I'm talking about here, this is the most sort of phenomenon-based one. So in the last 3-4 years, you've seen this huge rise of businesses spending money on mental health first aid. And typically, they're directing their staff towards courses run by Mental Health First Aid England, which is a fantastic organization which has really good kind of almost CPD-like material that I still retain to this day. I've done one of their courses and it's great, but companies shouldn't be relying on this as a solution. If they do that, they are simply placing their staff in the barrel of a gun, waiting for them to be fired out into this world that's very overwhelming and can be incredibly triggering and difficult. And though they may have done that 2-day course, they are not qualified psychotherapists, they are not qualified suicide negotiators, and they're certainly not qualified to step away from their roles for anything more than a few hours to deal with something that might be quite serious. So I would just caution businesses who are really thinking about relying on that as an idea to make sure that their spread of solutions is properly diversified. So wellbeing trap number 3, this is really a case of sticking plasters instead of proper pay and conditions. And that might sound like a quite kind of trade unionist thing to say, but it's not. If you run a good business, you'll have a good culture as part and parcel of that. There's no way you can run a good business without a good culture. So really, what I see happening is lots of companies who are kind of assuming that the best way to deal with workplace wellbeing is to try and make their employees happy. So they give them lots of wine tasting evenings, they give them chocolate tasting days out, and it's absolutely wonderful, but it's not a substitute at all for good working culture, good practices, good management, and appropriate pay. So if your business isn't doing that, there's no way you're ever going to fully get on top of workplace wellbeing, because so much of what we feel in the workplace is not about those events or that kind of excitement of going to a handout day or activity. It's about whether we're being treated fairly. It's about whether we feel we can belong, and it's about whether we are being properly compensated for the time that we put into our roles. And it's also about whether we're being properly mentored too with progression. So that's number 3. Wellbeing trap number 4 is conversely not spending the money. So I know that I've talked about, people spending money on courses and that potentially leading to pitfalls and a bit of a trap. But having said that, it is really, really important that you budget for this in the long term. I think I've seen a couple of examples where companies have kind of dived in headfirst, really keen, and the first thing they encounter is actually disappointment, because they outsource to a provider of some kind. Could be like a nutritionist, a sleep expert, could be something like that. And the moment they see any negative feedback, they think, well, that wasn't worth it. And that's just not how you should be approaching this, because like any investment, it's got to be for the long term. And like any new frontier of workplace culture, which I think mental health still really, really very much is, it's got to be something that you take your time over. So don't be disheartened by the first failure or the first problem. It's still really important to have that longer term plan and to give it the money to back it up. And then finally, wellbeing trap number 5. I mean, this is a little bit of a controversial one, hence why I've left it to last. But I think toxic men in the workplace have a massively detrimental effect on the people around them. And I'm not just talking about the differences between men and women in the workplace. I'm talking about diversity more generally, and some of the behaviors that we inherit in the business environment, and that culture of business development or lead generation or sales, whatever it is that you're doing, is very, very easy to inherit bad behaviors. So in this world that we now live in, where people are perhaps a little bit more conscious or indeed paranoid about those behaviors, it's always worth just checking in, both at a managerial level, but also on the ground, to see what's going on with unconscious bias. Because no workplace is ever going to fully tick that box. But as long as it's a conscious part of your process for building a good business culture, I think you stand in a much better stead to succeed. So those are kind of my 5 workplace wellbeing traps. So to just recap on them, number 1 is surveys instead of conversations. You've got to have human conversation in some way with the people that work with or for you. Number 2, leaving it to mental health first aiders. It's just not good enough. Your mental health first aiders will burn out, they'll be stressed, and they'll be in an even worse position, and they'll probably need mental health first aid themselves, which will leave them confused as to who to reach out to. Number 3, sticking plasters instead of pay rises. You need to look at the broader business culture and whether you're actually doing business in a good way. Is it actually detrimental to the people that are working for you and with you? And number 4, not spending the money. This is going to cost cash. It just is. There's no way of getting around that. You can't do it on the cheap. If you're committed to the project, put the money behind it, see where it goes. And number 5, toxicity and behavior. Unconscious bias is very, very powerful force, and nobody is immune from it. So it's really, really important to have an awareness at the very least of how that can impact the way that you work, whatever industry you work in. So that's me wrapped up for the day. I think that's just about 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions, comments, feedback, or they just want to chat about it, drop me an email. It's Ollie Smith, ollie.smith@morningstar.co.uk.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Ollie. That was some thought-provoking ideas. And I love how you took the angle of things that they should not be doing, because sometimes we listen more to those kind of things than we do about the things that we should. So thank you very much. In the next session, we have none other than Mr. Douglas Kruger. Douglas is an international Hall of Fame speaker, guy with a phenomenal voice, and really looking forward to his talk on breaking some rules. But before we do, let's have a last look at some of our sponsors.